So it is time for us to start our first panel discussion all about men. Man is the head of the family. It is not easy to be a man who wear many hats. So they have to take care of the family emotionally, mentally, financially as well. And during this pandemic, it is not easy for a husband or a father or an employee to work from home, taking care of family, taking care of work. So now we are going to address about men issue, all about men.
Wow, and I have the honor to moderate this panel. Our original lineup, Dan is not able to join us, and we wish him, we send him well wishes to him and his family. So now our panelists have been standing by. I'm just spotting now, Teresa, Norton, and Samuel Bobertz, a mom and son team. They are the directors of StarMakers in Hong Kong, and they do so many good things. And as Teresa likes to say, for all good things, right? So welcome and say hello if you can. Yeah, unmute. Yeah.
Unmute ourselves. Hello. What a wonderful and inspiring talk from Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a great way to start the morning and to begin this summit. Congratulations to both of you for putting this together. Veronica.
Yeah. And Sam, you want to say hi as well? Happy Sunday.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah, no, hi everybody. This has been this is already just starting off with such a positive note. Has been inspiring. It's getting me thinking a little bit about not only just today's talk, but other things. I know Teresa and I have been sort of taking notes and thinking about other things that we could potentially be doing. It's like, that's what's so beautiful about these opportunities, is that any one of these ideas can be a jumping off point for something else.
Exactly, voices of inspiration. Thank you. And then I see Olivier Courret, a mind coach and clinical hypnotherapist, and a dear friend of mine who's been so supportive throughout this summit. So, bonjour.
Bonjour, Teresa. How are you doing?
I'm great.
That's a great start of a Sunday, right?
Yeah, fabulous Sunday. You want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I can tell about myself. So as you mentioned, I'm a clinical hypnotherapist. So what this is all about for me, this is using the state of hypnosis to help my clients to understand what is creating the issues, the mental well-being or performance or health issue that they are dealing with. So this is mostly what I'm doing, and I started, as you mentioned, as a mental coach, so working a lot with athletes, helping them to improve their performance. And then I realized that most of the time there are a lot of underlying processes that happen at subconscious level that govern us. Okay. And I got very interested to understand actually what's happening inside. And this is mostly what I'm doing now. So a lot of my clients now, 50% are male. I got pretty much half male, half female. So I'm quite excited to be here today and to give my perspective on men's mental health.
And I'm going to have you pause there, Olivier. You know why? Don't spill all the beans. Save the secrets for a bit. And let me introduce our fellow panelists, Adrian, Lim, and Peng. Right? Am I saying that? I sometimes get your
Peng An.
There you go, Lim Peng An. That's right. Peng An in Chinese means harmony and safety, right?
Peace.
Adrian,
yeah, shalom.
Exactly. Adrian, say hello.
Yes.
You're in Singapore.
Yeah.
Say hello to our
hi.
audience.
I'm a counseling psychologist. I'm a registered psychologist, registered social worker, registered counselor. 29 years of clinical experience with over 3,000 clients, 1,300 families. And basically, my focus has always been with men, whether it's a husband, boyfriend, father especially, because they'll talk about the father wound, and also helping the men to rise up to the destiny they have been created for, not only to lead the family as a servant, servanthood, serving them, supporting them, but also to communities and society as a whole.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. And now we have, when I put this together, I thought, let's have the ordinary dude. He's not ordinary, we just say it like that. Jay, are you there? In the sea of people, there you go. He's joining us actually from his quarantine hotel. Jay Jiaquan Lu, also from Singapore, but he's now in Hong Kong visiting us. So Jay, say hello.
You need to unmute.
Yes, please unmute Jay. Let's see, I get him to unmute. I could message him there. There's a good thing about technology, isn't it? Instant messaging is such a blessing. Jay, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, say hello to our global audience.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be panel and so much, Teresa, having me. So basically, I'm just sharing my journey, average, in terms of mental illness and what, I'll be sharing of my previous journey in overcoming some of the struggles that I faced, and yeah, happy to share with everyone.
Yeah, I know you got lots to share. I love hearing all your stories. Now, I'm going to swing it back to Teresa and Sam. If you could tell us a bit more about what you do, and then we'll start the discussion. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, as Teresa mentioned a moment ago, Teresa and I are a mother and son team. We started working together about 8 years ago. I'll let Teresa sort of share where her journey began, but basically, Teresa was working as a professional coach and as a trainer, working with other companies, and I was working with a separate business based out of Beijing. And basically, I mean, to sort of summarize how the journey came together was that my background is in psychology, and Teresa's background's in theater. I was working for a separate company, looking for ways in which to better engage my teams as a leader. And that sparked a conversation between the two of us around how it is that individuals can sort of be empowered not only by their leaders, but can be empowered just by the workplace itself. And Teresa and I, our journey really sort of began through that process of back and forth talking about the work that I was doing, but then it turned into and snowballed into an opportunity for us to kind of go, what if we did this as a double header, a double act?
And I have to tell you that every one of my friends and everybody I talk to goes, how the heck did you get your son to work with you? And I say, I don't know, man. It was, divine intervention, I guess. It's a wonderful thing. Sam's right. My background is in theater. I work with leaders the same way that I worked with actors as a theater director. So basically, I look at the role that they've stepped into, the roles that they assume within the organization, look at what the natural talents that they bring to those and where there's a gap. And we work together to bridge that gap so that they are able to be both effective in their leadership, but also authentic and owning who they are.
Well, T to T, I have to say this, kudos to you both, and you always make such a wonderful team, and you're such great leaders. And, I want to especially thank you this morning for, I know you live in separate houses, which is also a great thing, right? It's a great balance because you work together.
Necessary.
Necessary. But you two decided to come on camera together so that you will be shown, you present yourselves as the professionals and as the mother and son team, because that's what we put on our website. And I really want to thank you, Sam and Teresa, for doing that. Yeah. Now, can we start with you then, since you two have such a great combination and do such great things? So the question is then, how do you get along? Because obviously Sam's psychology and Teresa's psychology are very different. How do you manage to still, be so good at what you do and be such a great voice of inspiration for your clients and for yourselves and, the people around you?
Well, it's interesting. I just posted something on Facebook at Facebook and also on LinkedIn about this this upcoming summit that we're so excited to be part of. But also, what are the things that you have to put in place in order to work with a family member? And we've had to think about that very carefully because we don't always agree. There are some of our personality traits. Sam is a certified workplace Big Five consultant, so he knows a lot about personality. And there are some of our traits that are very similar, which can be great, but can also be challenging, right?
Yeah.
And then there are some ways that we're very different, which can be great, but also be, potentially have challenging aspects to the way that we collaborate, and we have different working styles. So I think one of the things that one of the terms that we often use is about double clicking on things, right?
Yeah, the idea of double clicking is taking a concept and making sure that, an example I use is like, if I say the word feather, everybody can understand what the word feather is, but yet if we were to draw it and color it and then turn around, we realize actually everybody's understanding of the word feather is a little bit different. And so double clicking means to actually spend a little time going beyond the language and understanding and aligning around concepts themselves. And so to sort of expand on that, it's a lot of what helps us develop the content that we use with our clients is stuff that we use ourselves. I mean, if it works for us, it helps us navigate the difficult conversations and, you know, the tough times. It usually is something that we can then translate into sort of saying, okay, well, then leaders probably could benefit from something like this as well. And so another tool that's been hugely, hugely helpful for us has been sort of what's called sort of steel manning, which is what you do when you, rather than, we tend to, when you're going up against somebody else who has a different opinion from yourself, you have a tendency to want to diminish their argument. You want to, what is called straw man. You straw man that argument by turning it into its simplest form. Where steel manning is actually the opposite of that. You pause before you engage with one another and try to make the other person's argument to the best of your ability.
As your own.
As your own, exactly. To the point where they say, yes, you have summarized my point to a level that I feel like I can accept. Only then, when you have actually argued their side of it, do you actually engage in then sharing what your opinion is on things.
And I'm going to leap in with one other thing that I think is super important that Sam and I do, and we do this actively, and sometimes we have to do it often. And that is to say, I want to say I was wrong. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes it's after we've parted company and it comes through on a message, and sometimes it's a call, and sometimes it's in the moment going, you know what? I'm out of line and I need to be quiet and listen to you for a while. So we're very fortunate. We're really fortunate. And when I was listening to what Thomas was saying about the importance of, you know, raising young people who contribute to the community, I'm getting choked up here a little bit, but you know, this is the blessing that I feel I've got in Sam. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, into the focus of our panel discussions about men, obviously. Now, with all this understanding of the psyche of men, over to Olivier, if it's okay, and then I'll hand it over to Adrian as well, is then you guys work with the minds of men. How do you navigate that? And how is that different from my mind, for example?
Well, I don't know specifically about your mind.
You got to take some time and have a session with my mind.
But I think either way, I think there is a central part in what we are doing is understanding the role of our emotion. What Teresa was talking about a few minutes ago, this amazing communication that they seem to have in the family. But the underlying piece is that it seems that there is a freedom to express your emotion when you say, I'm wrong, or I accept to say how I am feeling. And this is essential because the way we are developing our behavior is strongly attached to the emotion. When we experience something, it's not really about the reality. It's more about what we perceive is happening to us. So we perceive something that is happening to us, and we are going to think about the potential outcome, whether this is a positive or a negative outcome. And we are going to experience some sort of physical sensation in our body. And our brain is going to decipher this physical sensation in the body and translate that into an emotion. So the brain is guessing the most appropriate emotion. So when it comes to navigating what's happening inside someone's brain, and it's not necessarily about the man or the female, it's essential to understand what is the map of this emotion, what's happening there. And one thing that I can observe as we are talking about mental health is, for a lot of men, a few things might happen. The first thing when they are in a family that dismiss or invalidate their emotion, then they cannot necessarily understand what's happening to them. They don't have the resource to put a name on their own emotion. Because we are talking about what's happening in childhood mostly. When we are an adult, we have more intellectual resource to understand what is happening to us. But it's at a very young age that we start forming all this behavior. So it's essential to create an environment for the child where the emotions are not dismissed. So it's one thing that I can see when I'm working with my client is what kind of environment did they grow into? Did they feel free to express their emotion, or were the emotion dismissed? The second thing, and this is the tags and the label that we put on man's emotion. At a very early age, men are being told, and I'm making a generalization here, and I apologize, but this is just for the sake of the exercise here. There are right emotion and there are wrong emotions to have. Men don't cry, but anger is okay. I can be violent, but I cannot cry and be soft. So what that does is that it creates the illusion that what I'm experiencing as a child is wrong. So we start developing this self-judgment about ourselves. So to your question is, how do we navigate through the client psyche? This is really as well connecting with how they are interpreting their emotion, and do they have a sense of judgment? And we all experience that when something happens to us. Say, why do I do that? I'm so stupid. I'm wrong. And that comes from childhood, where some emotions have been accepted and some have not been accepted. And what it creates as well, this is a lack of granularity, a lack of understanding of what we are experiencing. And the less granularity we have in understanding our emotion, the harder it is to be ourselves, the harder it is actually to be in tune with who we are. And this is when we start developing well-being or mental issues. Basically what happens is there is a disconnection from the self. So that's another thing that I do with my client, is understanding this disconnection from the self, this authentic self that I think, Teresa, you mentioned. And the third thing that happens sometimes is there is absolutely no one to talk to. When I ask my clients, you went through this trauma, you went through this experience, you were bullying at school, or you saw your parents fighting, who did you talk to? Most likely the answer is no one. Sometimes the answer is I try to talk to my dad or my mom most of the time, but they told me that's all right, everything is going to be okay. Once again, looping back to the first thing, which is about dismissing in a way the emotion.
Wow, that's very deep there. So what I'm hearing a lot of it is how men are shaped as a child, or how the family upbringing, or maybe the father figure. I think this is a good time to hand over to Adrian, because he's an expert in family psychology and who's also had his own experiences as a teen. You know,
Yeah.
Adrian, over to you.
Yeah, pulling the thread along about emotions, it's very important to understand our emotion state, or better known as feeling states, right? Particularly for men, safety and security is critical, right? Men will not be vulnerable unless they find that they can be in a safe space and a safe place with people that they can trust, who have their backs, who is able to have also that bonding, the relational bond, right? And to have that sensation that when I am with this person or I'm in this company, I can be who I am, rather than what I think I am or what I can do with who I am, right? And it's so important, since Teresa mentioned about shame. Let me just go very fundamentally, what happens particularly in our parenting process, even in our working processes as bosses, as CEOs and all that. There's a huge difference between shame and guilt. Guilt is something that I have done wrong. But shame says that I am wrong. And when we transmit a message, instruction, or even the discipline to our child, to our colleagues, to our subordinates, right? We need to actually say that what you did was wrong. You are not wrong, because you have the propensity to correct yourself and improve. And in our messaging, that's where the damage comes in, right? So when sometimes a staff in a huge MNC or companies will feel so torn by a manager just calling him, I don't like what you did. But the message they get actually is, I am wrong. And that could be triggered off from something that happened years ago in their childhood, in their teenagehood, right? We are never wrong in our identity, but because we have always a propensity, as long as we are aware, we realize, we come to acceptance that we did wrong and we want to change, right? And here is where the huge difference between the deed and the doer. For men especially, it hits them hard and hit them very badly, right? And that's where a lot of childhood traumas, right, is evolving from that, right? It could be a man innocently saying something to you, right, that actually reminds you that you have actually done and experienced something traumatic in the past, right? And that's where the triggers comes in, right? We only think like, oh, PTSD, going to war, going to accidents that is seriously wrong. But in our childhood, that is where our foundation lies. And it's so very important that we actually come to terms and speak to someone who is able to guide you through this, to navigate basically through our lives. And for a son, the blueprint, the model is the daddy, the father, right? While also having the feminine perspective from the mother. And as you know, around the world, divorces are up, separations are up, violence are up, especially during the pandemic. Where does a child growing up to be a teenager, to be a man, right, gets their identity from? Therefore, they can have the security to believe who they are and identify what are their inner mission, inner calling, inner vocation, and how that can be transmitted, right, into the authority that they are going to carry with them into their family of marriage, into fatherhood, into the workplace, right, into the schools, into the community, right? And all those things are something hardly is taught in our educational system. And that is where I feel is so very important that we bring this awareness. And actually, I believe very much, right, the first school is the family, and we need to empower, equip, right, and support young couples, right, in that whole journey.
I like that a lot, Adrian. I think what I'm hearing, some of that is, I think culturally, men, women as well, but we're talking about men here today. Men are shaped in a way that we are ashamed if we become vulnerable or that our emotions are wrong. And I'd like to hand over to Jay, who could possibly share with us your culture experience and your moments where you actually cross over those cultural barriers, where you become vulnerable and start sharing and start, seeking help and saying it is okay as a man to seek help. Jay?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much again. Yeah, so my journey in terms of mental wellness started when I went through a medical challenge 10 years ago. And at that time, I was actually, faced a lot of doubts about myself and whatnot. And to be more specific is that, I couldn't walk, because due to a brain cyst and after a neurosurgery. And what happened after that was that I was afraid to come out of my so-called shell. And I wanted to do it on my own. And I felt that I was alone. And, because the whole idea of men supposed to be strong, to be the stronger gender, to be able to fend for himself. So that was the concept that I had when I was going through the entire medical episodes, when I couldn't walk and I was wheelchair bound. But then I realized that, that I was not alone and no one is alone. And the help is just, around the corner. And actually through that journey, especially working along with my neurologist and whatnot, I soon realized that, there are some, hopes around, and all we need to do is to reach out to our loved ones, for support, to form that support network around ourselves. And that was my first instance in terms of mental wellness, because it's not just about trying to form an image that whereby I'm doing okay. It is okay not to be okay. It's okay to voice out. It is okay to reach out. And that's how the whole starting of the journey. I started to learn and grow. Yeah, I hope that it makes sense to you. Yeah, Teresa.
It makes a lot of sense, Jan. I think we're learning so much from you. You're such a great role model. Back to Teresa and Samuel. When we did rehearsal and we talked about both of you coaching men, leaders, male leaders. And my question to you was, and we need to get this out because the answer was so great and we had such a great discussion. How are male leaders different from us female leaders, and how do you navigate around that to bring the best out in them and allowing them to be vulnerable and allowing them to be their authentic selves? We're not getting the sound there yet. Unmute. Yeah, all good. Yeah, thank you. That's
I'll leap in here and just say, for the last 20 years, I've been working with leaders. As I said, I sort of deal with the process is very similar to the process that I would have when I was working with actors as a theater director, and that is understanding, where the gaps are in the role that they've taken on. And very often, one of the gaps has to do with this perception that they have, the ideas that they've developed, the story they're telling themselves about what a leader does, how a leader acts, how they behave. And it's important to explore, kind of how's that working for you? Sometimes that's the best question I can ask is, how's that working for you? Because if you're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and I have found that, most of my work has been here in Hong Kong over 20 years, mostly men. And the term vulnerable and leadership together is a very uncomfortable, it seems, combination, at least in these early days, right? And so instead, I started saying accessible leader, because the idea of being accessible to people sounded to them a little bit more like an open door policy, which they wanted to offer. Understanding a little bit more deeply then that in order for just not to have the door open, but for people to feel psychologically safe to be with you, we have to look at the behaviors, the leadership behaviors that are creating an environment where your teams feel they can engage with you. The question about is male, female, I've had the same conversation with women. So I think that Sam and I were talking about that, the fact that, like in the 80s and 90s, that whole thing of women getting the power suits, right? And that the whole idea was that you had to get in there and kind of man up. And so we've all fallen victim to a story that I think is probably not serving any of us very well. So that's what I would say.
Just to add to it, just this idea of, I'm going to sort of jump off of the idea of accessibility and add in an element of playfulness. I think the ability to experiment in a space where you don't always need to be right, but you can still be the custodian of a space, like a gracious host, like as a leader, for instance, to be a gracious host of a space. And I think that there are sometimes, to make this sort of specific, there's sometimes this, and again, it's sort of it's a narrative. I think it's somewhat of a universal narrative that gets, I think it has in some ways sort of historical and evolutionary underpinnings. But something that we did touch upon briefly in a conversation that we had before was just sort of saying, just because something is a certain way doesn't mean that we have to be victims to it moving forward. I mean, assuming that it's a closed loop, that the individual is formed by the community and the community is formed by the individuals. Like that's a closed loop, but there is a capacity as individuals to have some agency and say, okay, as Teresa was saying, how is this serving me? And if it's not, then one of our greatest adaptive capacities as a species is the ability to change, to sort of focus our awareness elsewhere, and then use that to sow a new behavior, that new behavior to sow a new habit, that new habit to potentially create a new state of being for ourselves.
Can I just leap in with one quick little thing? Because I know we want to hear from everybody, but I'll just say that experimentation, trying something new, because my work is theater-based, I bring in professional actors as part of my coaching strategy. So, and Sam does too with his work. And so you bring a professional actor in and you let people in a safe, consequence-free rehearsal environment experiment with some different ways of being and expressing themselves as leaders and engaging with people that they either find difficult or intimidating. And it can be transformative. But you kind of have to give them a safe environment to try something new before you nudge them out and expect them to, change the way that they're working with people. Because to Adrian's point, I think the idea that men particularly, but I think women too, are reluctant to put themselves in a vulnerable situation when they feel that the stakes are high and face may be lost, their reputation may be damaged, or they may take a wrong step. They need to have that security.
Thank you for that, Teresa and Sam. Sam, did you have more to add? Go ahead.
Final point, it's just sort of a yin and yang thing where you marry the rational with the emotional. That's what role playing can really help to do. It's that it's participatory.
Right. So I guess what I'm hearing is that we're hearing archetypes and there are ways of changing. And it's hard though, because we're so inbuilt, this DNA, this culture, this society. Olivier, if I could ask you, what at some point, how could we help men be soft? And it's okay to cry. And, and I love seeing men cry. I think it's such a beautiful thing, but I think a lot of my male friends don't think it's okay to cry. So how can we help them be soft and get out of these archetypes that's been so inbuilt?
Well, I think it's not necessarily about allowing men to be soft. It's allowing men actually to express the full spectrum of their emotion. That's the first thing.
We're having a little bit of tech.
Sorry,
hang on there,
Adrian.
Yeah, just hang on there. I do some of our participants, if you could coming in, unmute yourselves. We're just getting a little bit of interference. Appreciate that. Go ahead, Olivier.
Yeah, so the second thing is just to bounce back off what has been said a few seconds ago about creating a safe environment for men to feel safe. What does that mean to be safe and protected? It's not necessarily about having someone strong around you, who can protect you from the enemies, but it's about creating this safe emotional space where I can fully express my emotions. So one thing we can do is, first of all, be doing that for ourselves, allowing our emotion to be fully expressed. Once we create an environment where we express our emotion, then we allow the other people to enter this space. The second thing that we can probably do is, and I like maybe to bounce back on what Jay said a few minutes ago. There is a very interesting survey that was made. So that was in Australia. So that's of course based on the Australian population. So I don't want to necessarily do an extension of that to the world. But what's very interesting is what was observed is that female and girls, adult female and girls, were overwhelming, seeking for more information, formal and informal information and help than men. So they were looking help for friends, teachers, school counselors, while men actually were not really doing that. However, what was very interesting is that when men were diagnosed with a mental issue, the proportion of men seeking help of a psychologist was exactly the same as the proportion of female seeking help of a psychologist. So there is a tendency here, and I think you're right with men not necessarily feeling safe talking about these issues, asking questions, feeling that they might be vulnerable, while girls probably have less issues with that. So I think as the topic of today is really what is wrong with men's mental health, I think one of the questions we should ask ourselves is, is there any marketing issue really around men's mental health? Should we address mental health in a different way when it comes to men than when it comes to female? Maybe there is a completely different communication to have. You know, when we think about the way men build up strategies to deal with their mental health issues, they are probably very different from females' strategies. When female overwhelmingly use talking as a strategy, male, and that was part of his study in Australia as well. They were taking care of their health. They were doing a lot of exercise. They were using humor as a way to diffuse actually what they were experiencing emotionally as well. So I would say, how can we create that? How can we provide a platform for men so they feel safe asking questions, engaging about their mental health problems, seeking advice? Because once they seek advice, when they seek someone who can help them, they are completely there. And, you know, I can observe that every day with my clients. I have 50% male, 50% female. I don't have resistance from male to express their emotion once they know that they're in a very safe space to do so.
Wow, that sounds good. And I also certainly the media plays a part in shaping how we are, especially when we're kids. Teresa, I remember you mentioned something about that. You had some observations about movies or how men are portrayed, you know, in the media. Can you share with us on those?
Sure. Interestingly, I last weekend, I just decided to watch a couple of movies from the 60s. And one of them was the movie Alfie. What's it all about, Alfie? You probably remember the song, but you might not remember the movie. It was Michael Caine. And the idea behind it was that he was this rogue. He was this ladies' man. He didn't care about women, and he had a million of them. And the poster for it kind of says, it's sort of saying like, what a guy. But when you watch the movie, this is a very, very sick and sad film about a man who, spoiler alert here, at the end of the film, is asking himself this question. And so I was just saying that I think, you know, the problems that many men have in terms of what is perceived as masculine behavior, it's kind of like taking dominoes and flipping them back the other direction, and it goes way back. I mean, in terms of the ways that masculinity is promoted and presented in the media, whether it was movies or television or now, of course, all over the internet. I think it's a lot of knitting that needs to be examined and perhaps redesigned.
Yeah, reframing.
Reframing,
yeah, reinventing. And Adrian, I'll ask you this, and then we'll have a question from the audience actually for Jay. Adrian, you're in media speaking quite a lot. What is the common message or voice of inspiration or message of inspiration that you share in terms of encouraging, that we address men's mental health a little differently? Or how would be the best way, as Olivier was saying, how would you like the media to play a role in that in terms of addressing men's mental health?
Yeah, if you looked in the media, in the films, in the movies, sad to say, there's a lot of men bashing, right? You talk about The Simpsons, you talk about the Bride. A lot of these movies put down men to be just a macho person pushing their weight around and all that. That is a very sad situation because, for example, if the son, right, does not have a father, close, intimate, loving, strong, warm towards him, the default will be the media, will be the internet with the games and on all their friends, which gives a serious distortion to what true masculinity is all about. It's about servant leadership. It's about supporting. It's about being sacrificial, right? To be supporting a man, not pushing your weight or authority around. You're getting the best out of people, especially from your wives or girlfriends, right? To be able to show that you are meek, right? I want to highlight this concept of meekness. Meekness is power in check, power in check, you know, and you're using in the emotions that Olivier mentioned. The power within emotion is huge, but how do we channel this power to? Is it to inflate our own ego, or to serve others, to make the best of your spouse, your children, your colleagues, and even your bosses, right? Where does that humility comes in? Where does that meekness to be able to be channels of peace, of strength, support, right? For others to be the best that they can be. And that is what a true leader is all about, to make the best of others, being persons for others, right? Because we distort again the word love. Love is willing the good for the other, willing, using our wills coupled with our emotions to have this super punch that will support others and push others to be the best that they can be. So we'll be affirming, we'll be encouraging, we'll be able to give and affirm people, especially our family members. It's because our sons, our daughters will be growing up to be adults, right? And going back to the issue of men and women, imaging technology in MRI and very clearly shows when a man speaks and a woman speaks, there's different parts of the brain lights up, right? There is clearly a same but different. Right? We have the same size of the brain probably, but how we function, our thalamus, hippocampus, and all those things works differently. And part of it is through socialization, through our families, through our cultures, through the media, and that is where our distorted view of what masculine and femininity is all about. And then you see all this, our world is getting very gender confused, right? So my message, if Teresa, you want to ask, right? Find your source. Go back to basics, right? Who am I? Who are you? Because men always like to show their flash, their cards, they flash their cars, you know, their titles and all that. Who is behind that title of a CEO, right? What is it that makes me tick as a man, right? And that's why it's so hard and for men to actually be dethroned. And they go into a whole, I mean, women retire much gracefully, but men have a serious issue when they retire because they have put so much of what they are into who they are, right? They have put too much of what they do to who they are, right? Right? Strip them off of all the titles, strip them off the authority. Will you be naked or will you be robed in royalty?
Wow, that's such.
One thing I just want to ask here is I wonder how much of this is generational too. You know, Adrian and I are probably of the same, pretty much similar age, Adrian. And
50s, in the 50s.
That's right. And so, you know, interesting to maybe hear, you know, if the younger generation is still as entrenched in some of these ideas and models about masculinity and femininity.
Yeah, Zam?
I mean, with regards to that, I mean, obviously, I think, you know, Adrian was referring to the fact that, you know, that there are definitely conversations happening in that space. I mean, what comes to mind for me is, again, just using sort of archetypes of just this idea of being, say, cool, of men being well-adjusted. And the example that was used at one point was like it's sort of a universal, you'll see it in any like film or anything like that. It's like this idea of a man behaving a particular way with a love interest, but then as soon as their friends are there, it switches. And it's something that you can see, we laugh about it. We see them doing it and we go, there's sort of this unspoken understanding that is the universal and it transcends all cultures. And I think that is about sort of, that there are expectations that I believe, to Teresa's point, are being challenged at this point around the fact that that men have to just, in order to be of value, because we aren't, say, within society, we aren't the ones who need to be protected, quote unquote, in order to, we're the ones who go off to war historically, not so much anymore necessarily explicitly, but that's kind of been the point, is that the men were expendable. And so in order to be worthy as a mate, in terms of mate selection, the idea was the man had to be well adjusted and needed to show with the fancy cars or whatever it was. In a modern context, that's sort of the equivalent of trying to say, hey, look, I'm a suitable mate. And the question is now is like, can we adjust things to a point where we can have an open conversation as a community? And this is where I think, not just men's groups are super important. I'm a huge supporter of men's groups, men getting together and having these honest and raw conversations with each other. But I think mixed groups are important as well. They talk about, male allies with women. I question the term ally because it means that we're explicitly almost at war. But I do think that the idea of having, women to be able to be part of these conversations as well can help us get that yin to the yang and all that good stuff.
Right. And I love that, Sam, because often I have male friends, I have my male allies, and then I have mixed groups. And I think I find that very it's so nice, to be inspired and to be able to share. Now, I have a question from the audience, if that's okay. And any of you could answer this, I think. So the first question is, why men don't talk much in general to their families, but talk to their friends? So that's what Sam was saying. And the second question is, why men communicate more with digital gadgets, social media, watching the news, for example, instead of having a proper conversation with loved ones over a cup of tea or a meal? Any takers on that?
Okay, it's again early bonding attachment, right? Our fathers, rather a millennial like Jay, right? It depends on where how they are brought up, right? There's nothing Freudian about this, but it's basically about attachment theory, right? Bowlby, John Bowlby and all. The whole idea of connectedness. I mean, if to me, I've done a study on men's transition to fatherhood. It was presented in inaugural Fatherhood Asia conference in 2010. Right? What does it take to be a father? Right? Going through, but the issue in the last 10 years or so, especially in Singapore, where there is a fathers movement. The Dads for Life was launched in 2009, and I was part of the secretariat running things in schools. And it's so important that the father is at the delivery room, cutting the umbilical cord, playing with the child, right? And the father is the one, especially in the first 3 years, we talk about child's development and child psychology, right? The first 3, 4, 5 years is so important. For a son, if you talk about who's growing up to be a man, they need to detach, right? And from the mother towards the father, because he is the male. He needs to actually take the extra step from their sister, who's a female, to bond further with the mother. But for the son, they need to identify themselves. Hey, I'm very close to mom. I've been nursed by my mom. I'm in the mom's tummy for 9 months. But when it comes to the young, especially in the first 5 years, to me, the most critical age, right, for healthy all-round development, especially in the mental, emotional health, is for the father to be the toy rather than playing with a toy, to host around them, to play ball, play catching, carrying them around. Is so very important for the attachment to be bonded, right? And when that doesn't happen, the son feels that it is not right. There's even an advertisement where the father, when he puts up a French newspaper advertisement, and the father lowers the newspaper, the baby cries. When the father brings up the newspaper, the baby or the infant toddler actually feels safe. Why? Because we don't have that kind of attachment to them, right? And that's where even during the adolescent years, the pre-teens years, the father comes into play. And I even wrote a journal in Hong Kong Journal of Youth Studies talking about transition, from childhood to adulthood, right? And that is in the Chinese culture. It's in many of our cultures that we have totally forgotten the rites of passage, right? From a boy to become a man. What does it take for a boy to become a man?
Wow,
The
I
answer
love
is
that.
a father, right? Or a father substitute, right? To be there, to role model, to be the blueprint for what it takes to be a man, right? Unfortunately, media and all the other stuff has taken over that. When the father is absent, boy, you are in trouble.
Wow, thank you,
Like a-
Adrian. Yes, Tom, we got so many questions coming in. Tom, let's get your question out first. Tom?
Yeah, first to all of you, Adrian, Oliver, Sam, Teresa, and Jay, thank you so much. We could probably spend a whole week on the problems with, role models and males, that's for sure. My question is we know through studies, especially there's a great study done by the FBI and the Department of Corrections that 87% of violent offenders blame their dad for the situation. We know that in certain school districts that less than 20% of males play an active role in any kind of education for their kid, that if they are engaged, it's about being the sport coach as the dad, or, my job is to make sure that he gets the homework done. My question is, gentlemen, because all of you have such great solutions, is what's it going to take to get them to the table? I mean, that's always the difficult part is, and I think, Adrian, you touched on it, that a male crosses a line maybe where there's shame. And with this absentee fatherism, it's very difficult sometimes to re-engage them back into the conversation. So what do you think it's going to take to get men to, especially at a young education, because I think you said that, the role that they all need to play in raising a child, what's it going to take for all of you? This question is, and I don't know that solution. We can't get them to the table.
Right. Very good question, Thomas. And that's where in Singapore in 2009, I'm privileged to be part of the Dads for Life movement, right? Where we engage men, right, to rise up in their roles as fathers. Whether they have a father wound, there is opportunity to gather men together at a secular space, coming together, learning. Ken Canfield, Dr. Ken Canfield from the US came to Singapore in 2010 to conduct the ICANN workshop, where we talk about how we can be much more involved, much more aware, and much more engaged with our children, right? Boys or girls, right? Sons or daughters. That is where we have to gather men, because there's so much statistics. 90% of prisons are populated by who? Men, right? Women only take 10%. It's all over the world. It's a worldwide phenomenon. Who kills, whose suicide is highest? Right, men or women, 2/3, right? When a man says, I want to die, I really want to die, right? But when a woman says, I want to die, it's basically crying out for help. So it's a different coping and a different messaging that we need to really listen very clearly to, right? And for me, personally, I founded 4 schools, right, with men's fathers groups. That's the Catholic High, Gabrielite Fathers, right, and the others. And I've also, in my personal faith tradition as a Catholic, I started the first parish-based men's fellowship in my parish, the Church of the Holy Spirit, right? If I come a bit personal to me. And it is my mission right now in Singapore, right? And I'm going to talk about it in November 27 at another conference, how to form fraternal fellowship and formation groups. Fraternal means brother. How you bring the band of brothers coming together as men, right, to actually help us, right, walk this journey. And you always remember Liverpool, right? You never walk alone, right? I'm a fan since 1977 actually, when I was a kid, right? The idea is men think they are alone because no one has affirmed him. No one has said that I care for you. I love who you are and not what grades you can produce. That's important in our Asian culture for men, whether it's a father, a godfather, a coach, a teacher, a male teacher, to come around these boys, a group of boys, to lead them. I have worked parents from children from divorced families. A very
Teresa, I think there was a little problem with the sound there, and now we've got Adrian muted. But I just want to just leap in and say, it sounds to me, Tom, like it's a marketing issue. Part of
I think
it's all great
you
to say
touched
that
on
men
it.
need to be vulnerable, but if they don't want to hear that word, then we need to think about how do we make it cool to be accessible, to be there, to be part of that. Yeah,
That's right. And I think, Tom, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And Teresa, I think what you're doing, look, we know through facial recognition now that it almost identifies more how we react than even a lie detector test. I think James Cameron is working on something with 3,000 points on the face that actually determine whether you're lying or not, more than even a lie detector test. So, you know, this role playing, this acting, what all of you're doing is groundbreaking, especially when it pertains to this role models of figures. I love what you're doing with ICANN. And Oliver, again, you know, maybe another little point, like that's the key. We got to get these men to the table at an early age. Look, it's much easier to teach a kid 2 different languages at 2 than it is at 40. And that's no different than social and emotional learning. You know, so how do we engage them? And you know, we need these men at the table if we're going to develop a well-rounded kid. There's no way around it. Look, you get lucky if you're a single mom. You did a hell of a job. I get it. But there's a significant research that says when there is a well-balanced male in a family, you got a better chance.
Yeah.
I think if I may say something,
Oliver?
Teresa, about that. Yeah, if I may just add something about that.
Of course.
I think there is one thing that men are responding to is responsibility. And, you know, we talked about the roles that we endorse as men, and there are like a lot of different roles. And sometimes we get confused around these roles because the expectations and the responsibilities around these roles are not necessarily clear. And I think there is probably a communication to have about what are your responsibilities? What are the responsibilities of this role as a father? What are the responsibilities as this role as a husband? And clarifying that, and probably it's time to add into these roles the dimension around listening, providing a safe space, and everything that we have been talking about. Because men respond to responsibility. I think they do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's
great.
right. I actually have another question, more questions in the audience. Actually, this is such an engaging discussion. Thank you so much. Dr. Patrick Benson joins us from Thailand. Pat?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Yep, you're on.
Yep. Can you hear me? Yes,
Yep.
thank you. What an interesting conversation. I had a reflection. I'm also a clinical psychologist, and I have been dealing with both men and women, gender equity, and also as an organizational psychologist, I'm dealing with gender equity at the workplace. Now, a reflection I have, and is a question slash reflection, mainly a question. I observe nature, and in all the species in this planet are female dominated. We were too, until about 2,000 years ago, when we organized religion existed before that, but reorganized religion into organization, and suddenly we create, I'm sorry to say, fairy tale where it was the fault of the woman. In a Christian religion, for example, as Adam and Eve makes something wrong, Adam has the right to rule her, and for the next 2,000 years the men have been ruling the woman, forbid them to be engaged in any politic or social activity until very recently in our history. Now, 2,000 years of that, I was wondering if you have any take on that, in such as it has really changed the way the males see themselves in the society. And of course, recently, with all the Me Too and all the for the last 30 years, let's say 40 years, was the feminine activists it seems like nature taking back its place. What do you think?
Anyone want to take that question on the panel on religion?
Okay, I'm going to just say this, right? You need to have a proper understanding, right, about, there's not about blaming, right? You must understand, if you want to go down to the theology of it, right? Eve was taken from the rib and on the side of Adam and not from the head or the leg bone, right? But the whole idea is all of us are complementary. All of us are created, right, in the image of the Almighty. And it's so important that we complement each other. It's not a competition, by the way, it's a complementary role, right? And that's where supporting young couples before they're getting married is so very important, because there are a lot of, we bring into our families, in our marriages, baggages from our past, from our childhood, right? The whether it's the fatherlessness or even motherlessness, with mothers from in Asian country, leaving countries from like the Philippines, right, to work in other parts of Asia, even in Middle East, leaving their children behind, right? So the issue is very much how we can complement each other. But before that can happen, we need to support them, guide them through marriage preparation and ongoing formation as a couple, as a spouse, as families, as parents, as mothers and fathers. And that is so very important to guide them through, right? But let me just share what I do, right? To answer one other question here is from Terry, right? I engage men, right? I close a no-holds-barred session with them. Give me a mother crying to me, right, about the son and the daughter and doing this and that, right? I say, get me just half an hour with this man, right? And just tell your husband or whoever to just invest that half an hour, right? And I have been, thank God, I've been successful to be able to turn around the reframe, re-image men, to turn around their roles, right? Because I would tell them all the horror stories of the clients that I work with. Do you want that for your son or your daughter? You can make the difference even right now, right?
Thank you,
and
Adrian.
I dare you, as a man to man, right?
Thank you,
Rise up
Adrian.
for your destiny.
I think these are very important points. Let's answer some of the questions from the audience. I'm going to combine some of the questions because I think it's interesting that all of them are kind of, gel together. So there's a question about men, why they have different behavior, like they kind of morph their behavior with different people. So let's see who wants to answer that. And then the other question is that the one on religion, which Patrick already addressed. And I think the other question is, when men adapt their behavior towards different groups of people, and they also, at the same time, they like to interfere with their friends, and that's okay. But I guess the question is also addressing, but in terms of their own issues, they don't quite address them and they don't openly talk to them about their loved ones. Does that make sense? Olivier or Teresa, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just leap in here just quickly and say that I think what we're talking about is the way that we act around different people.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, hear the work that I do and they say, oh, acting, you mean like pretending? And I like to quote Sandy Meisner and say, acting is living truthfully under an imaginary set of circumstances. And when I'm working with people, their circumstances aren't imaginary, but we are acting all the time. We change, our behavior changes depending on who we're engaging with. You behave differently with your children, your boss, your peers, your mother, your friends. I mean, we talk about that a lot in terms of personality.
Yeah, certainly. Now, there's a question which I thought about too when we were talking about earlier how we're shaped, men are shaped, culturally and stereotyped, like men should be this, men should be this way. And, I have some male friends who are actually house husbands. So I was thinking it is okay in this time and age, any age, for a guy to say, I am okay being a house husband. And which one of our audience, Christina, was addressing that. Isn't it time for guys to learn how to do housework if they can't find a job? And the women, the wife, have to go out to be the breadwinner. I mean, it's okay, right? I mean, how our panel is, how can we get men to say that, to accept that is actually okay, reverse roles?
I brought, I was on radio in Singapore about probably 8 years ago. I brought my friend who's actually a lawyer who left his practice, right, and be the father at home, right? And I myself left my full-time work to take care of my son who has special needs, right? He has 5 neurological and 3 medical conditions, right? And I have not worked full-time, and that's why I work for flexibly so that I am the servant leader in the family. I need to put down my ego, my career, to hold it out, right? To support my son, right? Whose name is Emmanuel, right? And he's already 21. And interestingly, you mentioned this, I'm actually looking back at now, right? Of the journey less traveled that I've gone through, the road less traveled that I've gone through. And that has taught me many, many wonderful lessons about me. In fact, my son Emmanuel is my coach.
Sounds good, Adrian. You know, we have time for 3 more questions. Let's do this. I do like to give Olivier a bit more opportunity to speak, and also Jay as well. Olivier, there was a question in the audience about what if a man or men grew up with a weak father figure? What can we do about that?
Well, there is nothing you can do about the weak father figure. I guess that's a lot about the interpretation, like what does that weak means? That's very difficult to answer the question. I really don't know, but it's not necessarily about, you know, I guess, I'm not sure how to answer your question,
okay.
Teresa.
Olivier,
may I? Go ahead, Adrian, go ahead, please.
May I? Right?
That's okay.
This is my area. This is my area.
Sure,
right?
Adrian, yeah.
Matt, bring that guy to me, right? Because there are issues that he needs. And I will work with that father who's weak, because there's something within his past that needs to be unlocked for him to live out the destiny he's supposed to be called. And I have just been trained again in working with the image transformation therapy, right? All right, and this is only in the last 8 years that has been in the picture, right? And I will work with the men, right? Right.
Thank you.
I'm happy
I think
to
the
say,
key here, I think the key here, what I'm hearing is also, Olivier, is we could send you the clients as well. I think what I'm hearing, and I'm also a coach, is that I think we need to create, which Teresa and Sam have been saying, is create a safe space for men to be okay to access their emotions and express them. I think that's the key. Whoever they decide to work with, I think the key is also to get someone that they could resonate with and that they feel safe with, you know? So there is a question for Jay, and then I'll get the 2 audience that raised their hands. Jay, there was a question about you at the point when you were wheelchair, you know, out of the hospital, of that situation with your brain cyst. If you had to choose, how would you choose to live that experience again?
Yeah, I was just about to respond to Jackson, actually. Yeah, so to his first question, the key factor was perseverance. Yeah, because during that whole journey, you know, as much as the doctors can help me, as much as my family could be there for me, but the number 1 person is actually myself. So yeah, he meant, I think Jackson's second question was about mental self-help, mental wellness self-help. I think that's a very relevant point. So yeah, so the key factor was perseverance, you know, to really to tell myself that, you know, I can do it, I can make it, you know, because the odds at the time was about, at the time, the prognosis by the neurologist was that I only have about 15% chance of recovery. So that was actually a very stark future for me in that sense, because here I was, you know, here I over there at the time, you know, I couldn't walk, you know, it was a very rapid developing situation there. So perseverance was the first key. And I was actually quite surprised at myself at that time, was that I was quickly able to adjust myself. There was a period of grief, that sense, and I couldn't walk, and given with the prognosis. So again, perseverance, ability to believe in myself, in terms of mental wellness, self-help. So that was a key thing, for me to push for. Of course, along the journey, there was moments, there was times that I almost wanted to give up. And it's true. People that I taught were my friends. Eventually, they sort of left my social circle. Maybe they are too, I don't know. I can't speak for them, but I can only guess, that they perhaps they felt awkward, they felt bad that they couldn't reach out to me on time, and subsequently the connection was lost. But the key thing is I never blame them, for leaving my social circle. And I was able to tell myself that, this is human nature per se. I can't control other people, reacting to me. How are they responding to me? So what I did was to really, focus on myself per se, working along with the team of neurologists. I was working with a team of neurologists, the rehab specialists, the psychologists, they work with me together. So during that whole journey, there was a moment that I wanted to give up. There was a moment, because it was such a long journey for me to regain my ability to walk. So so yes, I do think that on retrospect, that if I was able to better equip myself with mental self-aid, mental wellness, self-help, I probably could recover faster, because I took more than a year, in rehab facility just to walk again. There was other issues as well, because, being a neurological patient, patient with going through after the post effects of a neurosurgery, I had to go through like epileptic seizures. This is something that I need to live for the rest of my life, and that is, I can't help it. But one of the key things I also learned during that journey was acceptance. Because acceptance is power. Once you accept that, what happened to you, and stop fighting against the flow, because that was me. That was how I made it true. Instead of fighting against all the stuff, I accept what happened to me, and that's how I was. In fact, doctors and the neurologists was actually very surprised that I was able to recover at a much faster pace, than other patients of same age group. So
Wow.
So that's how I can actually share with the rest of everyone.
Well, you're
Teresa,
doing, yes, go for it, Teresa.
Can I just build on something here that
Of course.
Jay is saying that I think is interesting, maybe to toss to Olivier and Sam. The idea of acceptance and I think identifying the importance of the role of the father is great to point out to young people today. But if you didn't have that father, and to not get dragged in, you have to kind of deal with what you've got, right? So I wonder to what extent acceptance of your circumstances and then moving beyond them is part of the journey of healing from not having perhaps a present, affectionate, attentive father. Olivier, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. And that's a complex one. So a couple of things about that. The first one, I've been reflecting about why I've been struggling answering this question. What do you do if you have a weak father? Because I guess in that exact circumstances, what I would do is not give an advice to my client or whoever is coming to me with that, but I would ask questions. I would try to understand. I would give them a safe space to understand what weak means to them. How does that impact them? Because to your point, Teresa, you can have a weak father and be absolutely fine with that. That doesn't matter to you. Or you can have a weak father and be absolutely devastated. Because in most cases, when we are a child, what happens to us have a meaning. And we believe that if something is happening to us, it's because there is something wrong with us. And I will bounce back on what Adrian said, which is absolutely right. As a child, all your needs are filled by the people around you. So naturally, if your parents are fighting, or if you have a weak father, you believe that this is because there is something wrong with you. So if I believe that there is something wrong with me, then I need to do something about it, which means that I start detaching myself from the self. I start to disconnect from the self. And this is where we start having problem. So to your point, Teresa, I'd absolutely agree. One of the things to do with a client is giving them this space so they can investigate what happened. We can use compassion as well. Compassion means really understanding the suffering of someone, understanding the hurt, understanding what trauma they've been through. And the trauma is not what happens to you. This is how you experience it inside. To understand if this weakness, for example, that they experienced from their father was hurtful or not. And then helping them to reconnecting with what Adrian mentioned about your authentic self, the truth about yourself, which is the same for everyone. You were born perfect. You were born perfect. You are unique. You are worthy. You deserve love. And you have inside you all the resources you need to accomplish anything you want in life. Once you can reconnect with that, reconnect about being instead of trying to escape or protecting yourself, connecting with this attachment that Adrian mentioned perfectly, therefore moving from I'm doing something to I am and I'm fine with who I am. And when you have done this job, then I guess you're fine with whatever circumstances you have been through life.
And, I think that's such a good way to say it. And not everyone is designated to have a great father figure. But the good news is that there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of other people that are outside of dad to learn, And we also have to come to have compassion for our fathers, that they weren't always groomed to be, they weren't taught how to be a parent either. And I say this to my parents all the time, is that they're learning too, right? We're all learning. So we have to be forgiving and compassionate of that. And I think this is the perfect way to wrap up the panel discussion. I'd love to carry on. I think this is a great topic and it's been so engaging. So thank you to all of you, Teresa, Sam, Olivier, Adrian, and Jay, who disappeared for a little bit. Jay, come back up to say goodbye. And, it's in our audience who's been so just, interacting with us with great questions. And we hope to have this discussion again. Is so important. Like this population, we need to address and their needs as well. So thank you so much, everyone. If you can